This video is brought to you by Imprint. For decades, the dominant force in Norwegian politics has been the left-wing Labour Party. However, according to current opinion polls, support for the Labour Party is now neck and neck with both their long-time rival, the Conservatives, but also the populist right-wing Progress Party, which has surged from around 12% at the last election in 2021 to 20% now. So in this video, we'll take a look at the populist right-wing Progress Party, why it's steadily climbing in the polls, and what this might mean for Norwegian politics going forward. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. But first, let's start with some context. There are two main things you need to know about Norwegian politics. Firstly, that Norway uses proportional representation, so governments are usually coalitions. And secondly, that Norwegian politics has traditionally been dominated by the Labour Party. Labour held an absolute majority from 1945 to 1961. Then, for the rest of the 20th century, Norway was governed by alternating minority Labour governments and Conservative-led centre-right coalitions. In 2001, Labour suffered its worst post-war election result and was replaced by a right-wing coalition, but then returned to power from 2005 to 2013. From 2013 to 2021, Norway had a Conservative Progress coalition, but Labour came back again at the head of a minority government in 2021. However, over the past decade, the party's rating in the national polls has steadily fallen, from a peak of around 40% in 2015 to around 20% now, where it currently sits level with the Progress Party. So where does the Progress Party fit in? Well, the party was originally established in 1973 by a kennel owner, Anders Lange, under the catchy name Anders Lange's Party for strong reduction of taxes, social contributions and public intervention. They were originally libertarians in favour of lower taxes, privatisation and a smaller welfare state. However, Lange died suddenly a year later, and in 1977 the party changed their name to the Progress Party and began broadening their political programme. Through the 1980s, the Progress Party increased their attacks on the Norwegian welfare state and took a tougher stance on immigration, which helped them nearly double their support in the 1987 local elections from 6.3% to 12.3%. However, their campaign was controversially helped by the now infamous Mustafa letter, a fake letter that was purportedly written by a Muslim immigrant and addressed to the party's leader, saying the entire Norwegian population will convert to Islam and that the cross on the Norwegian flag will one day disappear. Politician Carl Hagen, who led the Progress Party from 1978 to 2006, read out the letter at a rally in 1987 and said, "The asylum seekers are on their way to take over our fatherland." One thing to say, though, is that up until the mid-1990s, the Progress Party did have a more moderate wing, but under Hagen's leadership, several libertarian MPs split off from the party to form the Free Democrats, leaving behind a more populist group. Over the next few years, the topic of immigration became a major vote winner for the Progress Party, and by the late 1990s, they'd become an established force in Norwegian politics, taking part in several coalition governments with the Conservatives, and regularly performing well in local and mayoral elections. They were also successful at various parliamentary elections, emerging in 1997, 2005 and 2009 as the second largest party in Norway behind Labour. Anyway, let's bring things back to the present. As we mentioned earlier, since the last parliamentary election in 2021, the Progress Party has surged in the polls from less than 12% to 20%, meaning it's now level with Labour and only about 3 percentage points behind the Conservatives. This is largely due to the struggles of the current centre-left government. For more on this, you should check out our previous video on Norwegian politics, but to give you a recap, the current coalition government has gradually become more and more unpopular over the past couple of years, with cabinet ministers caught up in a whole series of scandals and conflicts of interest, from plagiarism to inside trading. This declining popularity has been reflected in surveys as well as election results, with the OECD Trust survey showing that Norwegians' confidence in their government fell 16 percentage points between the end of the Conservatives' last term and Prime Minister Jonas Gahr Støre's current one, from 64% in 2021 to 48% in 2023. While Norway still has the highest level of government trust in the OECD, this 2-year drop represents the biggest of any OECD nation, and this has benefited the Progress Party. They've also capitalised on the issue of oil and gas, which has been a source of disunity in the left-wing coalition. For context, Norway is one of the world's largest exporters of crude oil and natural gas, and overtook Russia as Europe's biggest supplier of natural gas in 2022, earning an estimated $170 billion more from oil and gas revenues than it did before the war. The Progress Party has long championed oil and gas exploration, arguing that more of Norway's $1.8 trillion sovereign wealth fund should be invested in infrastructure, and the recent windfall has lent credence to their position. But while there might be Norway-specific reasons, the Progress Party's success also maps onto a wider European trend of rising support for right-wing populist parties, largely due to growing fears over irregular migration. While the Progress Party rejects the populist label, its strategy has clearly been to win votes by capitalising on and also stoking anti-immigrant and anti-Islam sentiment. For example, in 2009, party leader Siv Jensen spoke against the stealth Islamisation of Norwegian society, while in 2010, two Progress Party MPs penned an op-ed in the Aftenposten newspaper claiming that a cultural invasion was being waged by immigrants, and that multiculturalism was, quote, stabbing our own Norwegian culture in the back. This kind of rhetoric is similar to what we hear from other right-wing populist parties in Europe, like the Sweden Democrats, whose leader has called for the closure of mosques, and the Dutch Freedom Party, whose leader said the Quran should be banned, both of which performed conspicuously well in their last national elections, finishing second and first respectively. Now, we should make one final point to end with, which is that there hasn't really been a formal cordon sanitaire in Norwegian politics against the Progress Party, unlike, say, in Germany, where the Federal Constitutional Court has ruled that the populist AfD can be classified as a suspected extremist organisation, or France, where there's been a historical consensus against working with the National Rally. This means the Progress Party has been able to integrate itself into Norway's political system fairly smoothly, and as we mentioned earlier, it's already been in coalition governments and helped pass various state budgets. So, looking ahead to the September 2025 parliamentary election, it'll be interesting to see how the party performs, and whether it could actually overtake Labour. Labour Prime Minister Sture has claimed it's fully possible for Labour to win the election despite their tanking poll ratings, and their current strategy seems to involve copying some of the Progress Party's economic policies, presumably to stop losing further support to them. For instance, they've hinted at lower wealth taxes for most folks, housing support for young voters who flocked to the Progress Party in last year's local elections, and raising spending from the country's sovereign wealth fund in 2025 to pay for public expenses. Whether or not this tack to the economic right will work remains to be seen. Fans of TLDR like you care about understanding the world around them. That's where today's sponsor Imprint comes into play. If you care about building a life of learning, then Imprint is the app for you. It's a new way to learn that turns your phone from an attention-sucking device to a tool for growth. You may have heard this before, but unless you've used the app, you likely haven't experienced something like this. That's because Imprint is beautifully illustrated and animated, creating a highly visual, bite-sized and interactive learning experience. It's the perfect antidote to a world where social media tries to keep us mindlessly dopamine scrolling day in and day out. Their library includes courses on topics like psychology, history, philosophy, finance, productivity, and many more, and quick reads you can consume in a single sitting. Since we last spoke to you about Imprint in September, I've done the philosophy course and am focusing on their course on the science of happiness. People study how to get in shape, how to eat right, and how to advance in their career. Understanding how humans are wired to be happy has been an interesting path to go down that I highly recommend to all of you. So make yourself feel better about your screen time, build a real habit of learning every day, and join the millions of people using Imprint. Plus, if you use the link in the description or scan the QR code on screen, the first 200 people will get 20% off an annual plan. Plus, they'll know that you came from us.